The morning began with the kind of routine that soldiers came to trust. Training missions weren't glamorous, but they offered a rhythm, a reminder that skill came from repetition. At the airfield outside Fort Huachuca in southern Arizona, the heat shimmered across the tarmac long before noon. The desert stretched endlessly, its dry winds carrying dust across the landing zone where the UH-60 Black Hawk waited with its blades gleaming in the sun. Specialist Maria Torres stood near the back of the formation, helmet tucked under her arm. She watched as mechanics gave last-minute checks, their hands moving with the efficiency of habit. Soldiers joked quietly as they climbed aboard, slapping shoulders and trading stories of weekend plans. For them, this was just another exercise, another notch in the long calendar of deployments, drills, and evaluations. The Black Hawk groaned to life, blades spinning until the air seemed to vibrate. The commander, Captain Richard Hayes, adjusted his headset, eyes sharp on the instrument panel. He had logged thousands of hours in helicopters, his reputation built on calm under pressure. The crew trusted him without question. When Hayes was in the cockpit, the soldiers felt safe. As the helicopter lifted from the tarmac, Maria felt her stomach lurch. She always did. She wasn't a pilot, wasn't even aircrew. She was logistics, more at home among manifests and supply chains than roaring engines. Still, training flights required her presence, and she had learned to control her nerves. She clasped her hands together, steadying herself as the desert spread below like a vast, sunburned ocean. The first 20 minutes passed without incident. Soldiers leaned back against their harnesses, some with eyes closed, others laughing into headsets. The pilot's voice occasionally broke through, calling altitude or position. From the outside, it was nothing but routine. Another bird in the sky, carving across the desert toward its waypoint. Then, without warning, the sound changed. It started as a cough, a sharp stutter in the mechanical heartbeat that carried them. The engine tone dipped, rose, then dipped again. Warning lights flared across the cockpit. Alarms shrieked in sharp, repeating bursts. The Black Hawk shuddered, dropping a few feet suddenly, causing several soldiers to grip their harnesses in shock. Captain Hayes's voice cut through the noise. "Hold steady. Everyone stay strapped in." Maria's pulse spiked. She looked out the side window. The horizon seemed uneven now, the ground rising quicker than before. The once confident laughter inside the cabin was gone, replaced by tense silence. The soldiers knew something was wrong. The helicopter lurched again, harder this time. A metallic groan echoed through the fuselage. The engine sputtered, struggling to maintain power. Maria could see the crew chief's expression shift from focus to alarm. He tapped gauges, muttering under his breath. The commander exchanged quick words with his co-pilot, too low for anyone else to hear. Then came the silence. The engines died completely. The hum of power vanished, replaced only by the slap of wind against the spinning blades, which now began slowing without the thrust to sustain them. The change was terrifying. Helicopters were not supposed to go silent in flight. Engine failure. A co-pilot shouted. The cabin jolted as gravity seized control. The Black Hawk began to fall, nose dipping toward the desert floor below. Soldiers gasped, bracing themselves instinctively, white-knuckled hands gripping straps and rifles. Maria's heart pounded so hard, it felt like it might burst from her chest. But Hayes's voice remained steady, sharp as a blade. "We're not dead yet. Hold tight." He pulled on the cyclic, wrestling to stabilize their descent. The blades whirred above them, catching air, but they were losing altitude fast. The dust and rock of Arizona rushed toward them with terrifying speed. Maria's training was in logistics. She had memorized supply codes, transport schedules, efficiency protocols. But this was chaos, the kind of life-or-death crisis she had only seen in movies or heard veterans describe in hushed tones. Her throat went dry. She glanced at the soldiers beside her. Some prayed quietly, lips moving without sound. Others stared wide-eyed, waiting for instructions that would never come. The commander's voice crackled through the intercom again. "Listen up. We've got limited control. If we don't get power back, we're going down hard. Anyone trained on Black Hawk systems?" For a heartbeat, no one moved. The question hung heavy in the air. Soldiers looked around at one another, faces pale. They were fighters, medics, specialists of every kind, but not pilots. The silence pressed in, broken only by the sound of wind whipping through the slowing blades and the shriek of warning alarms. Maria's hands clenched in her lap. The commander's words echoed inside her head, louder than the alarms. "Any Black Hawk pilots here?" She felt heat rush through her body, her breath caught between panic and decision. Memories surged her father's voice, his steady hand guiding hers on the simulator controls years before. Long nights in their garage, where the hum of old equipment filled the air, and he repeated the same lesson. The day may come when knowledge saves more than just yourself. She closed her eyes briefly, trying to drown out the terror of the present moment. The soldiers around her shifted, waiting, hoping someone else would answer. But no one did. The Black Hawk dropped lower, the desert floor now close enough to make out every bush and rock. Dust rose in the distance, already anticipating the crash. Captain Hayes repeated the question, louder this time, his voice edged with urgency. "Any Black Hawk pilots here? Anyone with training?" The silence that followed was unbearable. Maria opened her mouth, then shut it again, fear locking her tongue. Could she really say it? Could she admit what she knew, when lives depended on more than simulator hours? What if she failed? What if her attempt only made things worse? The helicopter rattled violently, shaking every seat. A soldier cried out as his helmet struck the sidewall. Hayes fought the controls, sweat beading on his forehead. The co-pilot worked frantically at the panels, but nothing responded. Maria's breath came fast, shallow. She looked down at her hands, then back at the commander. Something inside her shifted. The girl who had always chosen silence, who had been content to remain unnoticed in the background, felt an unfamiliar weight settle on her shoulders. Responsibility. Her father's voice returned, calmer this time, as if he were sitting right beside her. "Don't wait for permission to save lives. Step up." Maria's hand shook as she reached up to unbuckle her harness. She wasn't ready to speak yet, not out loud, but deep inside, she knew the moment was coming. The commander's question still hung in the air, demanding an answer, and silence could not last forever. The silence inside the cabin was unbearable. Every soldier felt the pull of gravity, dragging them closer to the desert floor. Yet no one answered the commander's desperate question. Helmets tilted from one face to another, each man and woman silently hoping someone else would have the miracle skill to stop what was happening. But this was infantry, medics, logisticians, warriors for the ground, not the sky. Captain Hayes's eyes burned as he scanned the cabin through the rearview mirror, searching for any flicker of recognition. His voice barked again, harsher this time. "Any Black Hawk pilots here? Any training? Any at all?" Still nothing. Specialist Maria Torres felt the weight of those words like a stone pressing down on her chest. She sat frozen against her harness, knuckles white as she gripped the seat frame. Her heart thudded violently, every beat echoing in her ears. The soldiers beside her looked terrified, and yet, not one of them moved. Her mind spun back to her father. Retired Chief Warrant Officer Daniel Torres had spent 2 decades flying Army helicopters, his pride tied to every hour logged in the air. Maria had grown up around rotorcraft, hearing stories of dust landings in Afghanistan and tense night missions in Iraq. Most daughters had bedtime stories. Maria had auto-rotation drills explained at the kitchen table. When she was 14, her father had rolled an old simulator into the garage. "This isn't a game," he had said, guiding her hands over the controls. "It's practice for the moment you don't see coming." Hours stretched into years, and Maria learned more than she realized. He drilled her relentlessly, sometimes until she cried, sometimes until she slammed her headset down in frustration. But always, he'd finish with the same words. "The bird will listen if you stay calm. Panic, and you'll kill everyone." Now those lessons roared back, louder than the shrieking alarms. She swallowed hard. Could she speak? Could she step forward with only simulator hours behind her? These were real lives, her unit, her commander. Failure meant death for all of them. She felt the sweat on her palms soak through her gloves, her chest tightening with every second wasted. Another violent jolt shook the helicopter. The fuselage creaked like a dying animal. A soldier 2 seats down began to pray aloud, voice cracking. "Lord, don't let it end like this." Others lowered their heads, bracing for impact. Maria's body moved before her mind caught up. She unbuckled her harness. The click of the latch sounded impossibly loud, drawing startled eyes. The soldier beside her grabbed her arm. "Torres, what are you doing?" "Sit down." She pulled free, forcing herself into the narrow aisle. Her knees wobbled with the vibration of the falling aircraft, but she kept moving toward the cockpit. Each step felt like walking into fire. Captain Hayes spotted her in the mirror, eyes narrowing. "Specialist, get back in your seat." His tone cut like steel. Maria's voice broke as she shouted back, louder than she had ever spoken in uniform. "Sir, I've trained. I know these systems." The cabin erupted in murmurs, disbelief washing over the soldiers. "A logistics specialist?" The quiet girl who barely spoke above a whisper in after-action reviews. Several soldiers exchanged skeptical glances, shaking their heads. One muttered, "We're dead if this is our plan." Hayes' eyes locked on her, weighing seconds against judgment. "What kind of training?" Maria's throat tightened. "Simulator, sir. Years. My father was a Black Hawk pilot. He taught me everything." The co-pilot twisted around in his seat, incredulous. "Simulators? That's not the same as." "We don't have time." Hayes snapped, cutting him off. His instincts screamed against it, but the altimeter screamed louder. They were falling fast, and no other hands had risen. The soldiers in the cabin looked on with a mixture of hope and terror, as though watching someone volunteer to walk across a minefield. Maria steadied herself at the edge of the cockpit, gripping the frame. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with something Hayes recognized: resolve. For a heartbeat, the commander saw his daughter in her. Hayes had flown with young soldiers before, some cocky, some unprepared, but every once in a while, one came with fire. He didn't have to like the odds. He just had to gamble on survival. "Get in the seat," he ordered. The cabin erupted again. "Sir, she's not," the co-pilot began, but Hayes cut him off with a glare. "You heard me. Buckle her in. We're out of options." Maria slid into the co-pilot's chair, her hands trembling as she reached for the harness. The seat felt enormous, suffocating under the weight of responsibility. She had sat in one like this before, years ago, in a museum display, when her father lifted her up to see the controls. Now the controls were real, alive, vibrating with the fury of a dying machine. The co-pilot strapped her in, muttering under his breath, "This is insane." Maria ignored him. She placed her hands on the cyclic and collective, familiar shapes that her body remembered even if her mind screamed she wasn't ready. Her heart thundered in her chest, but her father's words cut through the noise. "Calm hands. Calm mind. The bird will listen." Captain Hayes leaned close, voice clipped. Follow my commands. Do not improvise. Understood? Maria nodded, forcing her voice steady. Yes, sir. The commander returned his attention to the instruments, arcing instructions. We're going to attempt auto-rotation. Your job is to control descent rate. Don't overcorrect. Smooth movements only. She exhaled slowly, gripping the controls tighter. Behind her, the soldiers braced again, every eye on the quiet girl who had just declared herself their last hope. The desert floor loomed closer, every second erasing the margin for error. Maria Torres, the quietest specialist in her unit, sat ready in the co-pilot's seat of a dying Black Hawk, about to prove whether years of hidden practice were enough to save 30 lives. The cockpit was chaos. Red and amber lights blinked like frantic heartbeats across the panels. Alarms shrieked in merciless cycles, and the altimeter needle spun downward with every second. The helicopter was falling, and the desert floor rose closer with terrifying inevitability. Maria Torres sat strapped into the co-pilot's chair, hands locked onto the cyclic and collective. Her gloves were damp, her pulse hammering so hard she thought it might echo through her microphone. It felt unreal, as if she had stepped inside one of her father's old training scenarios. But this wasn't a simulator. There was no reset button. Behind her, the soldiers shifted in their harnesses, watching her like spectators to an impossible gamble. Whispers crackled over the intercom. She's not a pilot. She's going to kill us all. Why her? The doubt cut deep, but Maria forced herself to block it out. Captain Hayes's voice slashed through the storm. Listen to me, Torres. Eyes forward. Hands steady. We're going to auto-rotate. You know what that means? Her voice cracked, but held. Yes, sir. Use rotor momentum to slow descent. Collective controls blade pitch. Cyclic directs airflow. The co-pilot shook his head in disbelief. Sir, this is madness. She's quoting a textbook. That's not flying. Hayes snapped back. She's what we've got. Now strap in and help me keep us alive. The co-pilot's jaw clenched, but he obeyed, returning to his console. Maria felt her throat tighten. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to let go of the controls, to retreat back to the safety of silence. But she didn't. Hayes barked another order. Ease the collective, don't fight gravity. Let the blades bite the air. Maria obeyed, pulling gently. The helicopter lurched, the sudden shift rattling through the fuselage. Shouts erupted in the back as soldiers were jolted hard against the restraints. Too much. Hayes snapped. Smooth. You're not wrestling a bear, Torres. You're coaxing a bird. Her hands shook, but she eased off, adjusting with deliberate calm. She remembered her father's voice. Helicopters hate jerks. Treat her rough, she'll buck you off. Treat her steady, she'll listen. The Black Hawk responded with a subtle change, the descent rate slowing marginally. Not enough to guarantee survival, but enough to give them more seconds. Hayes checked his instruments, nodding once. Better. Keep your eyes outside, watch the horizon. Don't stare at the panel. Maria forced her gaze forward. The desert stretched endlessly, brown and unforgiving, dotted with mesquite bushes and jagged rocks. Heat shimmered in the distance. Every detail screamed how close they were to destruction. In the cabin, a soldier shouted, "We're still dropping too fast." Another barked back, "Shut up and let her fly." The tension was suffocating. Maria felt it pressing on her chest like an iron weight. Every movement she made determined whether they all lived or died. The responsibility was crushing, almost paralyzing. She clenched her jaw, forcing herself not to break. Hayes's voice softened slightly, though urgency still burned in every syllable. You know this, Torres. Trust what you learned. Don't think of them watching. Just fly the bird. She nodded quickly, sweat dripping into her eyes. Her grip tightened, but she remembered not to over-control. The helicopter vibrated violently, shaking like it wanted to tear itself apart. Her mind slipped back again, unbidden, to nights in the garage. Her father sat beside her as the old simulator whirred and beeped. She remembered struggling through simulated auto-rotations, slamming the virtual helicopter into the digital ground, screaming in frustration. Her father never scolded. He only made her reset. Again and again. Until one night, after dozens of failures, she landed smoothly. He leaned back, smiling. See? The bird listens when you do. That's all you needed. Now she clung to that memory as if it were armor. Collective slower, Hayes barked. She eased back. The pitch of the blades changed, the sound deepening as they bit harder into the air. The rate of descent shifted again, marginally safer. Dust swirled below them, warning of how close the ground loomed. Good, Hayes said, a rare thread of approval in his voice. Now keep her nose level. Don't let her tilt. Maria nudged the cyclic carefully, coaxing the helicopter back to center. The bird groaned but obeyed. For the first time, Maria felt a sliver of connection, like the machine was listening to her. But the co-pilot wasn't convinced. He slammed a hand on the console. She's too slow, sir. We need to flare sooner, or we're going to crater. Hayes glared. She's learning the feel. We flare when I say we flare. Maria swallowed, adrenaline flooding her veins. Her shoulders trembled from the effort of keeping the controls steady. The Black Hawk still dropped too fast, but the panic in the cabin eased slightly, as the soldiers realized they weren't plummeting like a rock anymore. Then another alarm screamed, louder than before. A systems warning flashed across Hayes's panel. The hydraulics were failing. The controls grew heavier in Maria's hands, each movement requiring more strength. Her arms shook. It's getting harder, sir. Hayes didn't sugarcoat it. Because the hydraulics are bleeding out. That means you can't hesitate. Every correction matters. You're not just guiding anymore. You're wrestling the devil. Maria grit her teeth, summoning every ounce of focus. Her muscles burned, but she refused to let go. The ground drew closer, details sharpening rocks, shrubs, a dried-out riverbed. They had maybe 30 seconds before impact. The cabin erupted again, soldiers shouting prayers, curses, or desperate encouragement. One voice rose above the rest. Come on, Torres. Don't quit on us now. She didn't look back, didn't dare. She kept her eyes locked forward, her hands locked on the controls, her breathing shallow and steady. Hayes barked, get ready. On my command, we flare. That's our last chance to bleed speed before we hit. Maria nodded, heart racing. This was the final test her father had always drilled into her. The flare, the moment that decided whether you walked away or died in fire. The commander's voice snapped like a whip. Wait for it, wait. The ground screamed closer. Dust plumes rose. Maria's body screamed to pull back now, to save herself from the crushing fear of impact. But she forced herself to trust Hayes, to trust the timing, to trust her training. Now, Hayes roared. Maria yanked the cyclic back and pulled the collective just enough. The helicopter's nose lifted sharply, the blades roaring as they caught the air. The Black Hawk's descent slowed in a violent jolt. Soldiers screamed as harnesses bit into their shoulders. The bird still dropped, still deadly fast, but slower than before. Hayes gritted his teeth, hands steady on his controls. That's it, Torres. Hold it, hold IT. Maria's arms shook, vision blurring from sweat and adrenaline. She poured everything she had into keeping the bird balanced, steady, alive. The desert floor filled the windshield. Impact was seconds away. The world outside the cockpit was nothing but swirling dust and jagged desert. The ground surged upward, closer with every heartbeat. The Black Hawk shook like a dying beast, its frame groaning under the strain. Inside, soldiers braced themselves, teeth clenched, hands gripping harnesses so tight their knuckles turned white. Some prayed aloud, others closed their eyes, refusing to watch their end rushing toward them. Maria Torres had no luxury to close her eyes. Her vision tunneled on the horizon, her hands locked to the cyclic and collective. Sweat blurred her sight, but she didn't dare blink. Every nerve screamed that she was seconds away from death. Captain Hayes's voice thundered in her headset. "Hold that flare, Torres. Don't you let it drop too soon." The helicopter's nose lifted, blades clawing at the air as they bit into their final rotations. The flare maneuver bled speed, but not enough. They were still descending too fast to call it safe. The co-pilot shouted, panic in his voice. "We're coming in hot, sir. Too much speed. She can't hold it." Hayes didn't flinch. "She will hold it." Maria's arms trembled violently. The hydraulics were almost gone, every movement of the controls demanding raw muscle. Her shoulders burned, her wrists ached, but she forced herself to keep steady. Her father's voice filled her head. "This is the fight you train for. The bird will test you, but she doesn't want to die either. Meet her halfway." The desert floor filled the windshield. Rocks, shrubs, and dry washes flew into sharp detail. Maria forced herself not to freeze, not to yank too hard, not to surrender to the rising panic. "Brace! Brace! Brace!" Hayes barked over the intercom. Soldiers ducked, pressed helmets against chest plates, clenched every muscle. Impact came like thunder. The Black Hawk slammed onto the desert floor with a bone-rattling crash. Metal shrieked as the skids gouged into the hard earth, kicking up a storm of sand and rock. The bird skidded, nose-dipping, threatening to flip. Soldiers screamed as gear rattled loose and slammed against walls. Maria gritted her teeth and fought. She pulled back on the cyclic, countering the nosedive, while her foot slammed the left pedal to correct a spin. The helicopter bucked violently, bouncing once, then slammed down again. Hayes barked, "Keep it level. Keep it level." Her arms felt like they might tear from their sockets, but she obeyed. The bird fought her, resisting every correction, but she refused to yield. She coaxed, adjusted, pleaded through sheer will. The Black Hawk screeched across the sand, a massive rooster tail of dust billowing behind. It swerved toward a jagged rise of rock. Soldiers shouted in terror. Hayes snapped, "Right cyclic now." Maria shoved the stick right. The bird groaned, skidding away from the rocks by mere feet. The fuselage shuddered violently as one skid dug deep into soft sand, threatening to catch and roll them. Maria countered instantly, easing the collective, keeping the nose balanced. Her body screamed with effort. Every tendon, every muscle burned as though fire ran through her veins. Then, with a final lurch, the Black Hawk slid to a grinding halt. Silence. For a long moment, no one moved. Dust choked the cabin, the taste of earth thick in every breath. The only sound was the cooling tick of metal, the whine of dying instruments. Soldiers blinked, dazed, as the reality sank in. They were still alive. Maria's hands were frozen on the controls, knuckles white, arms trembling violently. Her chest heaved, lungs desperate for air, but she couldn't release her grip. She felt if she let go, even now, the machine might spring back to life and kill them all. Captain Hayes reached over, prying one of her hands gently from the cyclic. His voice was calm, quieter than it had been all flight. "Easy, specialist. It's over. You did it." Maria exhaled a ragged breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her body sagged against the harness, drained beyond exhaustion. Her vision blurred with tears, though she blinked them away quickly, not wanting anyone to see. In the cabin, soldiers began to unbuckle, coughing from the dust. One broke into nervous laughter. Another muttered a string of curses, his relief spilling out. Slowly, the disbelief gave way to cheers, fists pumping in raw gratitude. Holy hell, she landed us. Torres saved our asses. The sound filled the helicopter, clashing against the eerie quiet of the desert outside. Maria barely heard them. She sat slumped in the co-pilot's seat, every nerve buzzing, every thought scattered. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a survivor who had barely threaded the needle. The co-pilot, still pale, stared at her as if she were something otherworldly. That shouldn't have worked. You're not even rated. Hayes cut him off sharply. Doesn't matter what she is. She got us down. That's the only rating I care about. He turned to Maria, eyes steady, carrying a rare weight of respect. Specialist Torres, you just did the impossible. Outside, the desert stretched silent and endless. The Black Hawk sitting battered, but upright in the sand. The crew began filing out, boots crunching on the earth, each one glancing back at the young woman still strapped in the cockpit. Some nodded in thanks, others clapped her shoulder as they passed. Maria stayed in her seat a moment longer, staring at her trembling hands. The memory of her father's garage returned again, the endless hours, the failures, the insistence that one day it might matter. She had always laughed at the idea. Now, with dust settling around her and 30 soldiers alive because of it, she no longer doubted. For the first time in her military career, Maria Torres wasn't invisible. She was the reason they were breathing. Hayes placed a hand on her shoulder before stepping out. Specialist. When I asked if there were any Black Hawk pilots here, I didn't expect the answer to come from you. But I'm damn glad it did. Maria managed a small, exhausted nod. She wasn't ready for praise, wasn't ready for the weight of being called a hero. But deep down, beneath the fatigue and fear, she felt something new. Purpose. The desert wind blew through the wreckage, carrying away the dust, leaving only the truth behind. Against all odds, the quietest soldier on board had kept them alive. And the story of that flight was only just beginning. The world seemed eerily quiet after the grinding halt. Only the faint groan of stressed metal and the whisper of wind across the desert broke the silence. The Black Hawk sat tilted slightly on its damaged skids, scarred and bruised, but miraculously upright. For several seconds, no one moved, as though the crew feared that any sudden motion would unravel the fragile miracle that had just occurred. Then sound returned in a rush. Soldiers coughed violently, waving away the heavy cloud of dust that choked the cabin. Harnesses clicked open. Boots shuffled. A few voices rose in disbelief. Jesus Christ. We're alive. Holy hell. That was real. Private Wilkins, one of the youngest on board, sat frozen in his seat, staring blankly at the bulkhead. His lips moved as though he were reciting a prayer. Sergeant Douglas reached over, unbuckling the private's harness with steady hands. Come on, kid. Feet on the ground. We made it. The rear doors screeched open with effort, sand grinding in the hinges. A wall of desert air poured inside, cooler than the suffocating cabin. One by one, the soldiers spilled out, some stumbling, some steady, all looking around in dazed astonishment. Outside, the Black Hawk looked like a beast that had fought to its last breath. The nose was dented, tail boom scratched, one rotor blade cracked and bent. Yet it was intact. Against every probability, the machine had not broken apart on impact. Maria Torres remained in the co-pilot's seat, trembling, her body refusing to release the tension it held. Her hands still hovered near the controls, ghosting movements as if the helicopter were still alive and demanding attention. Her chest heaved, breath shallow. She wasn't sure she could stand. Captain Hayes unclipped his harness, turned, and leaned toward her. "Torres," he said firmly, his voice more fatherly now than commanding. "You did it. The bird's down. Time to get out." She blinked at him, disoriented. The words took a moment to sink in. Did it really matter if she left her seat? Hadn't they all just narrowly escaped death? But when his hand gently gripped her arm, she nodded faintly and forced her body to obey. Her legs were unsteady as she stood. She half stumbled through the narrow cockpit, following Hayes toward the open hatch. When her boots hit the sand, the desert air washed over her like a baptism. Around her, the crew milled about, coughing, laughing nervously, some still shaking. Relief turned to bursts of emotion. Private Jackson dropped to his knees, kissing the ground. Another soldier clapped his buddy on the back, both breaking into shaky laughter that bordered on hysteria. And then, slowly, their attention shifted. It was impossible not to notice the young woman who had been silent in so many missions, the one who rarely spoke above a murmur during briefings. Now she stood in the sand, helmet dusty, eyes wide, arms trembling, the one who had pulled them back from the edge. "Torres," someone whispered. Another soldier, Sergeant Douglas, gave her a firm nod. "Specialist, I don't know what the hell just happened up there, but I'm pretty sure you saved every last one of us." Murmurs spread. Heads turned. Soldiers who had been seconds from death now looked at her as though seeing her for the first time. Maria's face flushed, and she instinctively looked down, kicking sand with her boot. She hadn't done it for praise. She'd done it because someone had to, because she couldn't ignore the voice inside telling her she was capable. But the gratitude in their eyes was undeniable. The co-pilot, still pale and shaken, broke the moment with disbelief. "She's not even qualified. She's logistics. She shouldn't even have known what those controls did." Hayes turned sharply, his tone leaving no room for argument. "She knew enough. And that's why we're standing here, instead of burning wreckage." The words silenced the doubters. Maria lifted her gaze, meeting Hayes's eyes. In them, she saw something she had never seen before, from a superior officer unshakable respect. The captain continued, "Specialist Torres, when I asked if there were any Black Hawk pilots here, I was desperate. I didn't expect an answer. But you stepped up. You kept calm, and you fought that bird all the way to the ground. That makes you a damn fine soldier in my book." The soldiers around them erupted into claps, cheers, and shouts. Some pounded her shoulder as they passed. Others raised fists in salute. It wasn't the rowdy celebration of victory, but the raw gratitude of men and women who understood how close they had come to never leaving that desert. Maria stood stiffly, overwhelmed, her heart hammering again, but this time not from fear. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving her body weak, but inside something else grew. A spark of pride she had never dared to let herself feel. For so long she had been background, the quiet soldier no one noticed, the one whose paperwork was flawless, but whose presence faded into the noise. Today she had been forced into the light, and there was no going back. A sudden crackle of static interrupted the moment. Hayes pulled his radio from his vest, lifting it to his ear. Rescue teams were already en route, alerted by the mayday that had barely gotten out before the engine died. "Roger," Hayes said into the mic, his tone returning to firm professionalism. "We're down but alive. No casualties." "Repeat, no casualties." He glanced at Maria as he spoke those words, his emphasis deliberate. Within minutes, faint rotor sounds echoed across the desert. Another Black Hawk circled overhead, scouting the crash site. A second soon followed, lowering toward the sand. Soldiers waved, relief flashing fresh across their faces. Maria watched them with a detached numbness. The world felt unreal, like she was drifting outside her body. Only when Hayes placed a hand on her shoulder again did she snap back to the moment. "You holding up, Specialist?" he asked. She swallowed hard, then nodded. Her voice came out hoarse. "Yes, sir. Good," he said. "Because this story isn't ending here. You may not feel like it yet, but what you did back there is going to carry weight. People are going to remember today." Maria didn't answer. She wasn't ready to process what he meant. She only knew that her father's voice had guided her hands. That instinct and training, drilled in dusty garages, had kept 30 lives intact. As the rescue helicopters touched down and medics rushed forward, Maria let out a long, shuddering breath. She had not set out to be a hero. She had only wanted to survive. But survival had made her something more. For the men and women who had ridden that doomed bird into the ground, she would forever be the one who answered the call when no one else could. And in the vast desert silence, Maria Torres began to understand that her life and her place in the army had changed forever. The sound of distant rotors grew louder, swelling across the desert air. At first it was faint, just a vibration against the sand. Then the unmistakable thrum of 2 Black Hawks filled the horizon. Dust whipped up again, stinging eyes and skin, as the rescue birds approached, circling the wreck like vultures around prey. But this time, the presence was comforting, not ominous. Captain Hayes raised one arm, signaling, while Sergeant Douglas lit a flare. The bright orange smoke cut through the haze, guiding the descending aircraft. The soldiers, scattered around the damaged helicopter, instinctively straightened, relief washing across weary faces. Maria stood a few paces from the wreckage, helmet under her arm, the desert sun beating down on her sweat-soaked uniform. Her body still trembled, her nerves refusing to let go. The echo of the crash replayed over and over in her mind, each jolt, each scream, each fraction of a second, when it could all have ended differently. The first rescue Black Hawk touched down, its skids biting into the sand. Medics spilled out, crouched low against the rotowash, sprinting toward the survivors. Their eyes widened when they saw the state of the downed bird and realized no body bags would be needed. "Everyone accounted for?" One shouted over the roar. Hayes stepped forward, his voice booming, clear. "All present. No fatalities. A few bruises, maybe concussions, but everyone's alive." The medic blinked, disbelief plain even behind his goggles. His gaze shifted to the Black Hawk's guard, beaten, tilted awkwardly like a drunk on its knees, and back again. "How the hell?" Hayes didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned slightly, gesturing toward Maria. "Specialist Torres, put us on the ground." The words cut through the chaos like a blade. The medics, soldiers, even Maria herself froze for a moment. She felt every pair of eyes swing toward her. Her throat tightened, heat rising in her cheeks. She wanted to step back, disappear, pretend it wasn't true. But Hayes's gaze held steady, daring anyone to question it. One of the medics let out a low whistle. "Specialist?" "She's not a pilot." "She is today," Hayes said simply. That silenced further questions. The medics moved quickly then, tending to cuts, bruises, and strained muscles. They checked pulses, shined lights in eyes, handed out water bottles. Soldiers sat in the sand, gulping greedily, sharing shaky laughter that bordered on tears. Maria remained standing, the canteen handed to her barely touched. Her legs ached, her shoulders screamed, but she couldn't sit. Her body was buzzing too violently, like every nerve was still stuck mid-crash. Private Wilkins, the young soldier who had frozen inside, approached her hesitantly. His hands still shook as he tried to tighten the strap on his helmet. "Specialist, thank you. I don't know what else to say." Maria shifted awkwardly, her instinct to wave it off. But his wide, earnest eyes stopped her. She managed a small nod. "You don't have to say anything. Just breathe. That's enough." He nodded quickly, swallowing hard, then moved away, clearly overwhelmed. One by one, more soldiers came to her, some clapping her shoulder, others simply nodding. The respect in their eyes felt heavier than the helicopter had been. Hayes reappeared at her side, speaking low so only she could hear. "They'll write reports. Command will ask 100 questions. But know this, Torres, no report, no statistic, no official statement will capture what you just did. You didn't just save this crew. You saved a legacy. Every soldier here will carry this story for the rest of their lives." Maria didn't know how to answer. Her throat closed around the words, her chest tightening again. She wanted to tell him it hadn't been skill, not really, only instinct and desperation. She wanted to tell him her father's voice had guided her, that she had been as scared as anyone else. But the look in his eyes told her it didn't matter. The truth of what she had done was undeniable. The medics finished their sweeps and gave the all clear. No serious injuries. Just a miracle in the desert. Hayes raised his voice, calling out to the gathered soldiers. "Listen up. We're moving out. Recovery teams will deal with the bird, but our mission now is to get everyone back to base in one piece." He paused, scanning their faces. "And before we go, I want it clear this crew survived because Specialist Torres stepped forward. Don't forget that." A cheer rose, raw and unrestrained. Soldiers clapped, whooped, shouted her name. Maria flinched at the noise, unused to being the center of attention, but something inside her softened. She wasn't invisible anymore. The crew boarded the rescue helicopters. Maria found herself seated near the door, wind whipping at her face as the aircraft lifted. Below, the wreck of the Black Hawk grew smaller, a scar in the desert sand, until it was nothing but a speck. She leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. The thrum of the rotors was steady, strong, so different from the dying stutter she had heard earlier. For the first time since the crash, she let herself exhale fully, shoulders sagging under the release. Beside her, Sergeant Douglas spoke quietly. "Specialist, you realize you'll never live this down, right?" She opened her eyes, frowning. "What do you mean?" He grinned, shaking his head. "Every soldier in this battalion is going to hear about what you did. You'll be a legend before we even land." The word legend made her stomach flip. She didn't feel like one. She felt like someone who had nearly broken under the weight of fear, who had clung desperately to training she'd never thought she'd need. But when she glanced around the cabin, saw the tired but alive faces of her fellow soldiers, she realized it didn't matter how she felt. To them, she already was. The flight back was quiet, each soldier lost in their thoughts. The adrenaline crash left them heavy-limbed, eyes half-closed, too drained for chatter. Maria watched the desert roll beneath them, endless and unforgiving, and shivered at how close it had come to being her grave. When the base finally appeared on the horizon, a collective sigh seemed to ripple through the cabin. The helicopters touched down smoothly, dust swirling once more. Ground crews rushed forward, expecting casualties, only to halt in surprise as the soldiers filed out uninjured. And then, as if on cue, word spread. Faces turned, whispers started, pointing toward the quiet young woman in dusty fatigues. The story was already running ahead of her, carried faster than any rotor. Maria kept her head down, trying to disappear into the crowd, but Hayes wouldn't allow it. He placed a firm hand on her shoulder, steering her toward the awaiting officers. "Specialist Torres," he said firmly, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "saved 30 lives today. You'll want her statement first." Maria froze as the weight of those words settled over her. The desert, the crash, the impossible landing, They were no longer just memories. They were history now, and her name was tied to it. She swallowed hard, realizing that her life had changed in a way she could never undo. The base was alive with noise when the rescue helicopters touched down. Engines roared, mechanics shouted orders, and dust kicked up in spirals beneath rotor blades. But beneath the routine bustle, something else stirred a current of rumor, carried like wildfire across the tarmac. By the time Specialist Maria Torres set foot on the ground, soldiers who had not even left their barracks were whispering her name. At first, Maria didn't notice. She was too busy following Captain Hayes, her boots heavy, her body still running on nerves rather than strength. Medics hovered, clipboard in hand, asking about dizziness, blurred vision, headaches. Maria answered mechanically. Yes, she felt fine. No, she didn't need to lie down. No, she hadn't blacked out. She felt detached, as if watching herself from a distance. But she couldn't ignore the stares. As she and the rest of the crew were escorted toward debrief, soldiers along the hangar line paused mid-task. Wrenches hung forgotten, fuel hoses left dripping, conversations halted. Heads turned, eyes following her. Some nodded subtly, others whispered to their neighbors. A few even clapped quietly as she passed. Maria lowered her gaze, heat rising in her cheeks. She wished she could melt into the ground. Inside the operations building, the mood was no different. Officers looked up from paperwork, eyebrows raised. Enlisted soldiers straightened in hallways, whispering behind cupped hands. Maria hugged her helmet to her chest, trying to shield herself from the invisible spotlight. The debrief room was crowded, the air thick with sweat, dust, and the tension of fresh survival. The crew gathered around, some still wide-eyed, others riding the high of adrenaline. Captain Hayes stood at the front, arms crossed, posture rigid but voice steady. All right, listen up. Command wants a full rundown. Every detail. But before we get into the weeds, I want to make something clear. He turned, locking eyes with Maria. We are standing in this room alive because Specialist Torres answered a question. No one else could. The room was silent. All eyes fell on her. Maria shifted uneasily in her chair, her throat dry. Hayes continued, his words deliberate. When the engine failed, I asked if there were any Black Hawk pilots on board. Torres stepped up. She wasn't rated, wasn't trained formally, but she took that seat and put this bird down. Don't let anyone downplay it. She did what needed to be done. A ripple of murmurs spread. The co-pilot, still shaken, muttered, She shouldn't have been able to. Hayes's voice cut through like steel. But she did. That's the only fact that matters. Maria swallowed hard, her stomach knotting tighter. She wanted to disappear. She wasn't used to this kind of attention praise, felt heavier than the helicopter controls. She shifted again, staring down at her boots. After debrief, they were released. The soldiers dispersed, some heading to the barracks, others to the mess hall. Maria lingered near the doorway, unsure where to go. Then, as she stepped into the corridor, a small group of soldiers approached. One of them, Sergeant Klein, slapped her on the shoulder. Hell of a thing you did out there, Specialist. Words already spreading. You'll be famous by Chow. Don't, Maria said quickly, her voice low. It wasn't, but he was already walking off, grinning. She sighed, pressing her helmet tighter against her chest. By evening, the whispers had grown into stories. Around the mess hall tables, soldiers leaned close, voices buzzing. They say the bird dropped from 6,000 feet, and she landed it like a pro. Heard the commander said no pilot could have done it better. She's not even aviation. She's logistics. Logistics, man. Maria sat at a corner table, tray of untouched food in front of her. A few soldiers passed by, nodding respectfully. One even offered a thumbs up. Maria forced a polite smile, but inside she felt a storm brewing. She hadn't asked for this. She didn't know how to carry it. Later that night, in the barracks, the atmosphere was the same. Her bunkmates bombarded her with questions. What went through your head? Were you scared? Did you ever fly before? Maria answered quietly, offering short replies, doing her best not to embellish. Yes, she was terrified. No, she had never flown a real Black Hawk. Yes, her father had been a pilot and taught her basics. No, she didn't think of herself as a hero. But no matter what she said, their eyes stayed lit with awe. When the lights finally went out and the barracks quieted, Maria lay awake staring at the ceiling. The voices of her comrades echoed in her mind, clashing with her father's calm, patient instruction from years ago. She remembered his hands guiding hers on the simulator controls, his steady voice saying, "One day, you might need this. You don't know when, but you'll be ready." Back then, she'd rolled her eyes, convinced he was exaggerating. Now, those words felt prophetic. The next morning, the attention only grew. As she walked across the base, soldiers she didn't even know nodded in greeting. Some saluted her out of respect, even though she outranked none of them. In the motor pool, a mechanic grinned and said, "So you're the one who cheated death yesterday." Maria tried to brush it off. "Just lucky, I guess. Luck doesn't hold a helicopter steady," he replied simply. Everywhere she went, the story followed. In the chow line, in the gym, even in the supply depot, people whispered, glanced, pointed. Some were skeptical, others admiring, but no one was indifferent. And Maria, she wasn't sure what to feel. Pride? Shame? Relief? The weight of 30 lives hung heavy on her shoulders, and the attention made it heavier still. She had only wanted to do her duty, to step in when no one else could. Now, she was carrying something larger than herself, a legend she hadn't asked to build. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the desert sky in streaks of red and gold, Maria walked alone near the flight line. The wrecked Black Hawk had already been hauled in, parked near the maintenance hangars. Its bent blades and scarred body were a silent reminder of the impossible survival. She stood there a long time, helmet tucked under her arm, staring at the machine. She reached out, touching the battered metal, feeling its rough heat beneath her fingers. "You're still here," she whispered. "And so am I." Behind her, footsteps approached. She turned to find Captain Hayes, hands clasped behind his back. "You know," he said, his voice carrying that quiet authority, "they're already calling you the quiet pilot. Words running faster than we can keep up." Maria shook her head, exhaling. "I didn't ask for that. I didn't want any of this." Hayes nodded. "I know. But sometimes history doesn't ask permission. It just decides who will carry it. You carried it yesterday." Maria's throat tightened. She didn't reply. Hayes stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Don't let the noise drown out the truth. You didn't do it for glory. You did it for them. That's the difference. That's why they'll remember." Maria swallowed hard, eyes burning. She nodded faintly, unable to speak. The captain gave her a firm pat on the shoulder, then walked away, leaving her with the battered helicopter and the vast, silent desert. For the first time, Maria allowed herself to truly feel it, not the fear, not the weight of others' expectations, but the quiet pride of knowing she had answered when no one else could. She was still the same quiet girl, but now, to everyone else, she was something more. The morning sun spilled gold across the base, glinting off polished boots and the steel frames of aircraft lined up in the hangars. Maria Torres walked with measured steps, her uniform clean, but her mind still tangled in yesterday's events. The memory of the crash, landing, the thunderous impact, the deafening alarms, The moment the Black Hawk obeyed her hands, still throbbed beneath her ribs. She had survived, yes, but she carried the invisible weight of 30 lives saved, a burden that no medal could fully measure. The operations building was alive with activity. Officers scrolled through reports, radios buzzed with updates, and soldiers moved in crisp, efficient lines. Yet today, there was a sense of anticipation that set it apart from routine mornings. Word had spread quickly. Specialist Maria Torres would be recognized officially for her actions. She entered the briefing room, finding Captain Hayes waiting. His expression was steady, commanding as always, but there was an unmistakable hint of pride beneath the surface. He gestured to a seat at the front. "Sit, Specialist," he said, voice firm. "You're about to make history." Maria lowered herself into the chair, her heart thundering. She felt exposed, as if every eye in the room was peeling back layers she had carefully hidden for years. Soldiers filed in, some whispering, some sitting silently, all waiting. Hayes cleared his throat. "Yesterday, we faced a scenario no training could fully prepare us for. Engine failure at altitude, the desert below, 30 lives at stake. And when I asked if anyone had the skills to put this bird down, one soldier stepped forward, a quiet, unassuming specialist whose preparation, instinct, and courage ensured that everyone in that helicopter survived." He paused, letting the words hang. Maria's stomach tightened as she pressed her hands into her lap. "Specialist Maria Torres," Hayes continued, "you demonstrated composure under impossible pressure, mastery beyond your official training, and leadership when no one else could. For this, you are awarded the Army Commendation Medal, and your actions will be recorded in official history as exemplary conduct under emergency conditions." Room erupted in applause. Soldiers stood, clapping, whistling, and cheering. Maria's face flushed. She had never been the center of attention, never imagined herself celebrated in such a way. For years, she had worked quietly, blending into the background. Now, she was unmistakably visible. A fellow pilot approached, shaking her hand firmly. "I watched your landing on the surveillance feed. Honestly, I don't know how you did it. I'd hesitate to try that, and I've flown this aircraft for years." Maria shook her head, a nervous smile tugging at her lips. I just did what had to be done." Behind her, soldiers whispered stories of the crash, replaying her actions like folklore. Private Jackson, who had been near the rear doors during descent, leaned over. "You didn't just save us, you made the impossible happen." "I don't care what you say, Specialist. That's heroism." Maria's chest tightened again. She wanted to deflect, to say it was luck or training, that she had just happened to be in the right place at the right moment. But for the first time, she couldn't. What she had done was deliberate. She had taken control, faced the fear, and guided 30 lives to safety. That was undeniable. The medal was pinned to her chest, cold metal pressing over her heart. She didn't flinch. Hayes gave a small nod, his expression silent approval. "Wear it well, Specialist. You earned every ounce of it." As the ceremony concluded, Maria stepped outside. The desert wind carried away the remnants of dust from yesterday's crash, leaving the air sharp, clean, and still. She walked across the tarmac, helmet under her arm, feeling the gaze of her fellow soldiers. Some smiled, some nodded, some just watched, awed. A group of enlisted soldiers approached her cautiously. "Torres," one said, "we were scared out of our minds yesterday. But you kept us alive. That'll stick with us forever." Maria nodded quietly, looking down at her boots. "I'm just glad you're all okay," she said softly. "But it's more than that," another added. "You set the standard for every flight crew from now on. People will be talking about you for years." The weight of their words pressed on her. She had spent her life trying not to stand out, trying not to be noticed. And now she was a symbol, a story, a benchmark for courage. It was terrifying and yet strangely freeing. She wandered toward the hangar where the downed Black Hawk was parked. The aircraft was already under inspection, rotor blades patched, skids reinforced. It looked scarred, battered, but alive. Maria ran her hand along the fuselage, remembering the jolt of the landing, a roar of the blades, the sheer panic she had held at bay. "You kept her alive," she whispered to the helicopter, almost reverently. "And you kept us alive, too." A shadow fell across her path. Hayes stood beside her again, silent for a moment, watching the helicopter. "You know," he said quietly, "the official reports will make you sound like some superhuman pilot. But you know the truth." Maria nodded. "I do. I just did what had to be done." He smiled faintly. "And that's exactly what makes you extraordinary. Don't underestimate the power of a soldier who refuses to quit, even when no one else believes it's possible." She looked at him, realization dawning. This wasn't about medals or attention. It was about courage, responsibility, and knowing deep down that she could rise to the occasion. Across the base, soldiers continued their routines, but the whispers of Maria Torres, the quiet logistics specialist who landed a crippled Black Hawk and saved 30 lives, had become legend. The story would echo in barracks, mess halls, and classrooms for years. New soldiers would hear it and draw inspiration. Veterans would nod in quiet respect. And Maria herself, finally, understood the truth. She had stepped forward when no one else could, and in doing so, she had rewritten her own story. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the base, Maria stood alone on the flight line. The desert stretched endlessly, vast and unforgiving. The wind ruffled her hair, carrying the faint hum of helicopters in the distance. She breathed deeply, letting the weight of the past days settle. She was still quiet. She had always been quiet. But now, beneath that quiet, there was something more: confidence, recognition, and the hard-earned knowledge that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about stepping forward anyway. And for Specialist Maria Torres, the quiet girl who had once sat unnoticed in training sessions, that was more than enough. She turned and walked back toward the barracks, carrying the medal, the story, and a newfound sense of self. The desert wind whispered through the base, carrying her legacy forward, and Maria knew one thing for certain: she would never be invisible again.